The stone floors of the palace were cold beneath Alara's knees as she scrubbed away the remnants of yet another lavish feast. Her hands were raw and red, cracked from years of lye soap and endless labor, but she had learned long ago to work through the pain. Invisibility was her greatest protection. As long as she remained unremarkable, just another Omega servant among dozens, she could survive. The other servants chattered around her, gossiping about the Alpha King's latest decree or speculating about which noble daughters might catch his attention at the upcoming moon ceremony, but Alara kept her head down and her mouth shut. She had perfected the art of being forgotten, of blending into the background so completely that even those who passed her daily would struggle to describe her face. This was how she had lived for 8 years, ever since she had stumbled into the capital city as a traumatized 15-year-old, the only survivor of a massacre that had wiped out her entire bloodline in a single night of fire and betrayal. The Alpha King Kael Thornbrook was everything the rumors claimed and more. At 29, he ruled the northern kingdoms with an iron fist, his reputation for cold calculation and merciless justice preceding him into every room he entered. Alara had seen him countless times over the years, always from a distance, always with her eyes carefully lowered. He was tall and imposing, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent and utterly unreadable. His presence commanded absolute attention, his alpha aura so powerful that even the most dominant wolves in his court instinctively submitted when he entered a room. He walked through the palace like he owned not just the building, but the very air within it. And perhaps he did. His word was law, his decisions final, his power unquestioned. Alara had never spoken to him, never been close enough to smell his scent or feel the weight of his gaze, and she intended to keep it that way. Men like Kael Thornbrook were dangerous, not because of what they might do to her intentionally, but because their mere existence drew attention, and attention was the one thing Alara could never afford. But fate, as Alara had learned through brutal experience, cared nothing for careful plans or desperate prayers. It came for her on a night when the moon hung full and silver in the sky, its light streaming through the tall windows of the palace, like liquid mercury. Alara had been assigned to clean the king's private study, a task that usually fell to more senior servants, but had been given to her when the head housekeeper had taken ill. She worked quickly and efficiently, knowing that Kael was attending a council meeting in the war room on the other side of the palace, and would not return for hours. The study was a reflection of its owner, all dark wood and leather, filled with maps and military strategy books, weapons mounted on the oi, walls alongside the preserved heads of enemies defeated in battle. It spoke of a man who valued power above all else, who saw the world as something to be conquered and controlled. Alara was careful not to touch anything beyond what was necessary for cleaning, hyper-aware that even the slightest disturbance might be noticed by those piercing gray eyes. She was polishing the last of the silver candlesticks when the explosion shook the entire western wing of the palace. The sound was deafening, a massive boom that rattled the windows and sent books tumbling from their shelves. Alara dropped to the floor instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs as screams erupted from somewhere below. Smoke began to seep under the door, acrid and thick, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of fire and blood. The palace was under attack. Through the chaos of her panic, Alara's mind raced through her options. She could try to escape through the servant passages, disappear into the city, and start over somewhere new, somewhere far from whatever war or rebellion had just breached the palace walls. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But even as she considered it, she found herself moving toward the door instead of away from it, drawn by sounds of fighting that were growing closer with each passing second. The corridor outside was a scene of absolute carnage. Bodies littered the floor, guards and rebels alike, their blood pooling on the marble in dark, spreading stains. The rebels wore no identifying marks, but they fought with a coordinated precision that spoke of military training and inside knowledge of the palace layout. Alara pressed herself against the wall, trying to edge toward the servant stairs without being noticed, when she saw him. Kael was at the far end of the hallway, surrounded by at least a dozen attackers, his sword flashing in the firelight as he fought with a ferocity that was both beautiful and terrifying. He had already taken multiple wounds, blood streaming from a gash across his shoulder, and another along his ribs. But he fought on with the relentless determination of an alpha who refused to fall. For a moment, Alara thought he might actually prevail through sheer willpower alone. Then she saw the archer on the balcony above, his arrow already nocked and aimed directly at the king's heart. Alara moved without thinking, her body reacting before her mind could catalog all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She launched herself forward, screaming a warning that was lost in the clash of steel and the roar of flames. The arrow flew, and she felt, rather than saw its trajectory, felt the way it cut through the air toward its target. Kale turned at the last second, his enhanced alpha reflexes allowing him to partially dodge, but the arrow still found its mark, burying itself deep in his chest, just inches from his heart. He went down hard, his sword clattering from his hand, and the rebels surged forward for the kill. Something inside Alara snapped. It was a sensation she had not felt in 8 years. A power she had buried so deep she had almost convinced herself it was gone forever. But grief and desperation had a way of breaking even the strongest chains, and the chains she had wrapped around her true nature were suddenly, violently shattered. The transformation took her like a tidal wave, overwhelming and absolute. Her bones shifted and reformed, her senses exploding into hyperfocus as her wolf surged too. The surface for the first time in nearly a decade. But this was not the shift of a normal Omega, or even a normal Alpha. Her fur, when it emerged, was not brown or gray or black, like every other wolf in the kingdom. It was silver, pure and luminous, glowing with an otherworldly light that seemed to emanate from within. Her eyes blazed with power, twin stars of molten platinum that lit up the darkened corridor like twin suns. The ancient magic of her bloodline, dormant for so long, roared to life, with a force that sent the nearest rebels stumbling backward, their wolves whimpering in instinctive terror. This was the power that had made her ancestors both revered and feared, the power that had ultimately led to their extinction. This was the power of the Silver Wolves, the healers and truth-seers, the blessed and the cursed. Alara did not attack the rebels, though every instinct screamed at her to tear them apart for daring to harm her mate. The word echoed through her consciousness with devastating clarity. Mate. The bond she had felt stirring the first time she had caught Kale's scent years ago. The connection she had ruthlessly suppressed and denied, now blazed between them like a living thing, golden and unbreakable. But there was no time to process that earth-shattering realization, because Kale was dying, his blood pumping out around the arrow shaft, his heartbeat growing weaker with each passing second. Alara shifted back to human form, her servant's dress hanging in tatters, and fell to her knees beside him. His eyes were open, those storm-gray eyes now hazy with pain and blood loss, but they focused on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He had seen everything. Her transformation, her power, her eyes still glowing with silver light even in her human form, and he was still conscious enough to understand exactly what it meant. Her hands moved to the arrow, and she felt the healing magic rise through her palms, warm and electric and demanding. This was not the gentle healing of pack doctors or the herbal remedies of healers. This was something far older and far more powerful, a magic that could knit bone and flesh, that could call a soul back from the very brink of death. The price for such power was steep. It would drain her completely, leave her vulnerable and weak, and it would announce to everyone in the palace exactly what she was. But as she looked down at Kale's face, at the man fate had chosen for her despite every cruel twist of destiny that had brought them to this moment, she knew there was no choice at all. She pulled the arrow free in one smooth motion, ignoring his sharp intake of breath, and pressed her glowing hands directly over the wound. The magic poured out of her in waves, silver light washing over his chest, sinking into his skin, seeking out the damaged tissue and repairing it with a speed that defied natural law. The rebels had regrouped and were advancing again. But Alara could not stop, could not even look up from her work. The healing required absolute concentration, a melding of her will and her power that left no room for distraction. She felt Cale's heartbeat strengthen under her palms, felt his torn muscles knit back together, felt his punctured lung reinflate and begin to function again. The wound on his shoulder sealed itself. The gash along his ribs closed, and even the smaller cuts and bruises faded as if they had never existed. It took perhaps 30 seconds, though. It felt like hours, and when it was done, Alara swayed, her vision swimming, her magic depleted to dangerous levels. Kyle surged to his feet with the fluid grace of a fully recovered warrior, catching her before she could collapse. His sword was back in his hand in an instant, and he placed himself between her and the advancing rebels, his alpha aura exploding outward with a force that made even Alara's wolf whimper in submission. What happened next was a massacre. Kale fought like a demon. Unleashed, his speed and strength amplified by rage and the lingering effects of her healing magic. He cut through the rebels with brutal efficiency, showing no mercy, giving no quarter. Within minutes, every attacker in the corridor was dead or unconscious, and royal guards were flooding in from the other wings, finally having fought through whatever diversions had been set to keep them away from their king. Kale barked orders with the authoritative precision of a military commander, directing his men to secure the perimeter, find any remaining infiltrators, and tend to the wounded. Through it all, he kept Alara behind him, one hand wrapped around her wrist in a grip that was both protective and possessive. She was too weak to stand on her own, her legs trembling, her head spinning, but she forced herself to stay conscious, to stay alert, because she knew what came next would determine whether she lived or died. When the immediate chaos had been contained, Kale finally turned to look at her fully. They were alone in his study now. The door closed and guarded, the sounds of ongoing cleanup muffled by thick walls. He had released her wrist, but positioned himself between her and the only exit. Whether consciously or unconsciously, she could not tell. His eyes, those impossibly intense gray eyes, swept over her from head to toe, cataloging every detail. Her silver hair, which she had always kept dyed a common brown, was now revealed in all its gleaming glory, falling past her, shoulders in waves that seemed to catch and hold the moonlight. Her eyes, which she had always kept carefully downcast, met his directly, and she saw him inhale sharply when he saw that they still held traces of that platinum glow. Her scent, which she had masked with oils and herbs for years, now filled the room, sweet and wild and utterly unique. And beneath it all, weaving through every breath and heartbeat, was the bond, the mate bond, golden and insistent, pulling at both of them with a force that could not be denied or ignored. Kale spoke first, his voice rough from shouting commands, but steady nonetheless. "You are Silver Wolf." It was not a question. The Silver Wolves were legend, stories told to pups about the ancient guardians who could heal any wound and see through any deception, who had served as advisors to kings and protectors of the innocent until they had been wiped out in a purge that had happened when Kale was barely 10 years old. The official story was that they had been killed by foreign invaders, martyrs in a war that had ultimately been won. But Alara had learned the truth the night her family burned, had heard the conspirators boasting as they set the fires, had seen the faces of the wolves who had betrayed them for power and gold. The Silver Wolves had not been killed by foreign enemies. They had been murdered by their own kind, by wolves who feared their power to reveal corruption and lies, who wanted them gone so they could continue their schemes without the threat of exposure. Alara met Kyle's gaze and saw her death in those gray depths, or perhaps not death, but something equally terrifying. Captivity, study, exploitation. A living weapon to be used and controlled. She straightened her spine despite her exhaustion and spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse but clear. "I am the last. My family was murdered 23 years ago when I was 15. I have been hiding ever since." Kale's expression did not change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, some emotion too quick to identify. "Why reveal yourself now?" he asked. "Why save me and expose what you are when you have hidden successfully for so long?" The question was fair, and she considered lying. Considered telling him it was simple compassion or a servant's loyalty to her king. But Silver Wolves could not lie. Not effectively. And she suspected he would know if she tried. "Because you are my mate," she said simply, and the words hung in the air between them like a declaration of war. The bond flared at the acknowledgement, singing through her veins, trying to pull her toward him. She saw Cale's hands clench into fists, saw his jaw tighten, saw the way his eyes dilated as his wolf responded to the bond with primal enthusiasm, even as his human mind clearly grappled with the implications. A mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, a gift from the moon goddess herself, but it was also complicated, especially when one half of the bond was the king of the northern kingdoms and the other half was a survivor of a massacre that had been sanctioned, if not directly ordered, by the previous king, by Cale's father. "You know who killed your family," Cale said, and again it was not a question. His intelligence was one of the things that made him such an effective ruler, his ability to see connections and patterns that others missed. Ilara nodded slowly. "I know some of them. I was young and it was chaos, but I saw faces. I heard names. Some of them are still alive. Some of them still hold positions of power in your court." She watched his reaction carefully, looking for any sign that he already knew, that he had been complicit in the cover-up or the continued persecution of her kind. But what she saw instead was cold, calculated rage, not the hot fury of the battlefield, but the ice-cold anger of a man who had just realized he had been deceived on a fundamental level. "Who?" he demanded, and the alpha command in his voice made her wolf want to roll over and submit, want to tell him everything immediately. But Ilara had not survived 8 years by giving in to her wolf's instincts. She had survived by being smart, by being careful, by never trusting anyone completely. "If I tell you, what happens to me?" she asked. "Do I become your prisoner, locked away and studied? Do I become your weapon, forced to heal your soldiers and root out your enemies? Or do I simply disappear, another inconvenient truth buried to protect the stability of your kingdom?" The IE. Questions were blunt, perhaps dangerously so, but she was too tired and too emotionally raw to dress them up in pretty words. Cale stared at her for a long moment, and she could practically see the wheels turning behind those storm-gray eyes. He was weighing options, calculating outcomes, trying to determine the best course of action for his kingdom and himself. Finally, he moved to his desk and pulled out a clean sheet of parchment and a quill. "Write down every name you remember, every face you saw, every detail about that night." Then he paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something almost gentle. "You are my mate. I felt the bond the moment you touched me, the moment your power flowed into me. I do not know what that means yet, or what we will do about it. But I know this: you will not be a prisoner here, and you will not be a weapon. You will be protected, and those who murdered your family will answer for their crimes." It was a pretty speech, and a part of Ilara desperately wanted to believe it, but she had learned long ago that powerful men made promises easily and broke them just as easily when those promises became inconvenient. Still, she had little choice. She was too weak to run, too exposed to hide again, and the mate bond was already working on her, making her want to trust him, want to believe in him. She took the quill and began to write, her hand shaking slightly from exhaustion, but her memory clear and sharp. She wrote down names and titles, descriptions of faces and voices, details about the conspiracy as she understood it. When she was done, the list was longer than she had expected. Nearly 20 names, including 3 members of Cale's current council and one of his most trusted generals. Cale read the list with an expression carved from granite, but she saw his knuckles go white where he gripped the parchment. "These are serious accusations," he said quietly. "If you are wrong, if you are lying or mistaken, this could tear the kingdom apart." Ilara met his eyes steadily. "I am not wrong. I am not mistaken. And silver wolves cannot lie, not about things that matter. It is part of our magic, part of our curse. We see truth and we speak truth, whether we want to or not." She saw him absorb that information, saw him understand the implications. If she could not lie, then every word she had spoken to him was absolute truth. She was his mate. Her family had been murdered. These people were guilty. The king stood and moved to the window, staring out at the smoke still rising from the damaged wing of the palace. "The attack tonight was not random, was it?" he said. "It was connected to your presence here, to the fact that someone realized what you are." Alara shook her head. "I do not think so. I have been careful. No one has seen my true form or my power in 8 years. This attack was likely about something else, some other political scheme or rebellion. But it forced my hand, forced me to reveal myself to save you. Which means that by tomorrow morning, everyone in the palace will know what I am. Word will spread. The conspirators will know I survived. They will come for me. Then we move first," Kale said, turning back to face her. "We move tonight, while they are still off balance from the attack, while they think I am wounded and vulnerable." He walked to his desk and pulled out several more sheets of parchment, his movements quick and decisive. "I am going to arrest every person on this list on charges of treason and conspiracy to commit murder. I am going to lock down the palace and conduct a full investigation. And you are going to tell me everything you remember about that night, every detail, no matter how small, because we are going to build a case so airtight that even their own allies will not be able to defend them." It was bold, perhaps recklessly so, but Alara could see the strategic brilliance behind it. Strike hard and fast, before the enemy could regroup or mount a defense. Use the chaos of the attack to justify extreme measures. Present the evidence in a way that made opposition look like support for child murderers and traitors. But there was a risk, a significant one. These people had allies, had resources, had blackmail material on half the nobility in the kingdom. They would not go quietly, and they would drag down anyone they could in their fall. "Are you prepared for what this will cost you?" she asked. "Some of these wolves have served your family for generations. Some of them are beloved by the people. Going after them will make you enemies, powerful enemies who will work to undermine you at every turn." Kale looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Something between determination and something softer, something that made her heart skip a beat. "They murdered children," he said quietly. "They slaughtered an entire bloodline of healers and truth-seers because those healers and truth-seers threatened their ability to lie and steal and manipulate. They have been sitting in my court, advising me, pretending to serve the kingdom while actually serving only themselves. I do not care what it costs me. I will not let them continue, and I will not let them harm you." The mate bond pulsed at his words, warm and approving, but Alara forced herself to stay focused. Over the next 3 hours, Kale worked with the focused intensity of a wolf on the hunt. He summoned his most trusted guards, the ones he knew beyond doubt were not compromised, and gave them arrest warrants written in his own hand. He sent messengers to the High Court and the Council of Alphas, informing them of a major conspiracy uncovered during the attack and requesting their presence for an emergency tribunal. He ordered his scribes to begin compiling every financial record, every correspondence, every scrap of evidence related to the accused. And through it all, he questioned Alara, gently but thoroughly, pulling out details she had not even realized. She remembered. The smell of accelerant used to start the fires. The specific dialect of the wolves who had done the killing, marking them as being from the eastern provinces. The symbol she had seen branded on one of the attackers' arms. A twisted knot that she had later learned was the mark of a secret society dedicated to maintaining traditional pack hierarchies at any cost. By the time dawn broke over the palace, 16 of the 20 wolves on Alara's list were in custody, locked in the palace dungeons and stripped of their titles and privileges. 3 had fled during the night, proving their guilt as effectively as any confession. 1 had tried to fight and had been killed resisting arrest. The palace was in an uproar, nobles and servants alike shocked by the sudden purge of so many high-ranking officials. Rumors flew wild and chaotic. Everything from a military coup to mass poisoning to the king having gone mad from his injuries. Kale let them talk. He knew that the truth, when it came out, would be so much worse than any rumor. The tribunal convened 3 days later in the Great Hall. with representatives from every major pack in the northern kingdoms in attendance. Kale had spent those 3 days personally overseeing the investigation, barely sleeping, driving his people hard to compile an ironclad case. Ilara had been kept in a suite of rooms in the royal wing, technically not a prisoner, but definitely not free to leave, guarded by Kale's most loyal wolves and visited by him each evening for more questioning and more conversation. The bond between them grew stronger with each interaction, and she found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with his power or position. The way he rubbed his temples when frustrated, the dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights, the gentleness in his voice when he asked her to recount painful memories. He was still commanding, still alpha to his core, but there was more to him than the cold king she had observed from a distance. When the tribunal finally began, Kale stood before the assembled alphas and nobles and presented his case with the precision of a master strategist. He started with the financial records, showing patterns of embezzlement and bribery going back decades. He presented correspondence that proved coordination between the accused, plans to eliminate political rivals and consolidate power. And then, only after he had established a foundation of corruption and conspiracy, did he bring out Ilara. She walked into that hall in clothing fit for a noble, not a servant. Her silver hair unbound and gleaming in the light from the massive windows. Her presence caused an immediate uproar, wolves gasping and whispering, the older ones recognizing immediately what she was. Silver Wolf. Impossible. They are all dead. It cannot be. Kale let the chaos continue for several minutes before raising his hand for silence. This is Ilara Moonshade, the last surviving member of the Silver Wolf bloodline. 23 years ago, her entire family was massacred by wolves who feared their power to heal and to see truth. The official story was that foreign invaders were responsible, but that was a lie. The wolves responsible for that massacre are in this room. Some of them are in the dungeons below us. Others fled when they learned their crimes were about to be exposed. He gestured to Ilara. She will now testify about what she witnessed that night, and I remind everyone present that silver wolves cannot lie. Their magic binds them to truth in all things. Ilara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She told them everything. The fires, the screams, the faces she had seen through the smoke, the conversations she had overheard as she hid among the bodies of her family, too terrified and too young to understand the full scope of what was happening. She described how she had escaped, how she had survived alone in the wilderness for months before, making her way to the capital and disappearing into the servant class. And she named names, pointing to the wolves in the dungeons, identifying them as the ones she had seen participating in the slaughter. The accused tried to deny it, tried to claim she was lying or mistaken, or that Kale had somehow manipulated her into false testimony, but their protests rang hollow, especially when Kale presented the physical evidence that corroborated her account. The tribunal lasted 5 days. Additional witnesses came forward, pack members who had suspected something wrong, but had been too afraid to speak up. Financial experts who traced the money stolen from the Silver Wolf estates after their deaths. Historians who produced documents proving that the massacre had been planned months in advance. The evidence was overwhelming, and in the end, the verdict was unanimous. All of the accused were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, treason against the crown, and crimes against the goddess herself for their destruction of a blessed bloodline. The sentences were equally unanimous. Death for those who had actively participated in the killings, life imprisonment for those who had covered it up or profited from it after the fact. But the tribunal brought to light an even more devastating truth. Kale's father, the previous Alpha King, had not ordered the massacre, but he had known about it afterward and had helped conceal it. He had seen the Silver Wolves as a threat to his authority, had resented their ability to sense deception and their tendency to speak uncomfortable truths about corruption in his court. When presented with the opportunity to eliminate them without getting his own hands dirty, he had taken it, providing political cover to the conspirators and ensuring the true story never came to light. Kale learned this from documents his father had kept locked in a private safe, documents that detailed payments to the conspirators and instructions on how to maintain the Cover story. The knowledge that his own father had been complicit, even if not directly responsible, shook Cale in ways that Alara could see, despite his attempts to maintain his composure. In the weeks following the tribunal, Cale threw himself into reforms with the same intensity he had brought to the investigation. He established new oversight committees to prevent corruption, implemented protection laws for wolves with rare abilities or bloodlines, and created a truth commission dedicated to uncovering and acknowledging historical injustices committed by the Crown. He offered reparations to the surviving relatives of other families who had been wronged by the previous administration, and he opened the palace archives to independent scholars to ensure transparency. It was exhausting, often thankless work, and it earned him as many enemies as admirers. But he pursued it relentlessly, as if trying to atone for his father's sins through sheer force of will and policy reform. Through all of this, Alara found herself drawn deeper into his world. She attended council meetings as an advisor, her ability to sense deception proving invaluable in weeding out those who still sought to manipulate the king for their own gain. She worked with the healers to document her abilities and train them in techniques that had been lost with her family's death, though none could replicate her power fully without the Silver Wolf bloodline. And she spent her evenings with Cale, the two of them slowly navigating the complexity of their mate bond, while also building something that felt like genuine partnership and friendship. He told her about his childhood, about growing up under his father's cold and exacting rule, about the pressure to be perfect, and the fear that any weakness would be exploited. She told him about her family, about the warmth and laughter that had filled their home before the massacre, about the loneliness of hiding who she was for so long. The physical aspect of their bond proved harder to navigate. The pull between them was intense, a constant awareness of each other that made Alara's skin feel too tight and her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. She could smell Kyle's scent from across a room, could feel his emotions through the bond when they grew strong enough, could sense his presence even when walls separated them, and she knew he felt the same, could see it in the way his eyes tracked her movements, in the way his voice gentled when he spoke to her. Alone, in the careful distance he maintained as if afraid that touching her would shatter his control, but he never pushed, never demanded, never used his position or his alpha authority to pressure her into anything she was not ready for. It was that restraint, that respect, that finally convinced her he was nothing like his father, nothing like the wolves who had destroyed her family. It happened on a night 4 months after the tribunal, during the first full moon ceremony held under the new reforms. Cale had opened the ceremony to all wolves regardless of rank or status, making it a celebration for the entire kingdom rather than just the nobility. The moonlight was bright and silver, spilling over the gathered crowd like a benediction, and Alara felt her wolf rise to meet it with a joy she had not experienced since childhood. She shifted without thinking, her silver fur gleaming, her eyes glowing with that ancient platinum light. Around her, other wolves shifted as well, a sea of fur and power and wild magic. And in the center of it all stood Cale in his alpha form, massive and powerful, his dark fur shot through with silver threads that marked him as royalty. Their wolves found each other as if drawn by an invisible string, circling and playing, relearning how to trust and to touch. When they shifted back to human form hours later, dizzy and euphoric from the run, Alara found herself in Cale's arms, his lips on hers, the bond singing between them with such intensity that it drowned out every doubt and every fear. They came together under the moon with a passion that felt both inevitable and sacred, claiming each other fully, allowing the mate bond to complete itself in a rush of magic and emotion that left them both breathless and transformed. Afterward, lying tangled together in the grass, Cale pressed his forehead to hers and spoke words she had never thought she would hear. I love you. Not because the bond demands it, but because of who you are. Because you are brave and strong and kind despite everything you have suffered. Because you saw good in me when I am not sure I deserved it. Because you make me want to be better, to build something worthy of you. Alara felt tears slip down her cheeks, though whether they were tears of joy or relief, or simple overwhelming emotion she could not say. I love you too, she whispered back. I love your strength and your honor, your determination to do what is right even when it costs you. I love that you fight. For those who cannot fight for themselves, that you are willing to change and grow and admit when you are wrong. She kissed him again, softer this time, sweeter, and I love that you gave me back my voice, my power, my right to exist without hiding. The next morning, Chaol announced their mating to the kingdom, and Alara became not just his mate, but his queen. It was a role she had never imagined for herself, never wanted, but as she stood beside him on the palace balcony and looked out at the gathered crowd, she felt something settle into place. This was where she was meant to be, not hiding in the shadows but standing in the light, using her power to heal not just bodies, but the deep wounds that corruption and injustice had left on the kingdom itself. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some cheering the love story of their king and the legendary Silver Wolf, others uncertain about a queen who had been a servant, still others resentful of the changes her presence represented. But Alara had learned long ago that you could not please everyone, and that trying to do so often meant betraying yourself. Over the following years, Alara and Chaol transformed the northern kingdoms in ways both large and small. They established schools that taught all wolf pups regardless of their rank, ensuring that Omega and Beta children had the same opportunities as alphas. They reformed the justice system to focus on rehabilitation and truth rather than simple punishment. They created councils where common wolves could bring grievances directly to the crown without fear of retribution, and they worked tirelessly to root out the remaining corruption that had been allowed to fester for generations, using Alara's truth-seeing abilities to identify those who sought to deceive, and Chaol's strategic mind to outmaneuver them politically. It was not easy. They faced assassination attempts, political sabotage, smear campaigns that painted Alara as a witch who had bewitched the king and Chaol as a weak ruler controlled by his mate. But they faced it together, supporting each other through the dark times, celebrating together during the victories. And slowly, gradually, the kingdom began to change. New traditions emerged, ones that valued cooperation over domination, truth over convenient lies, healing over endless cycles of revenge. The packs that had once been isolated and suspicious of each other began to work together, to share resources and knowledge, to see themselves as part of a larger whole rather than competitors for limited power. 5 years after Alara's revelation, she gave birth to their first child, a daughter with her mother's silver hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. They named her Luna, after the goddess who had brought them together despite impossible odds. Luna was born with power that shone like a beacon, a combination of her mother's healing abilities and her father's alpha strength that marked her as something entirely new. As Alara held her daughter for the first time, feeling the weight of her in her arms and the pure joy radiating through the mate bond from Chaol, she thought about how far they had come, from servant and king, from survivor and ruler, to partners and parents, to wolves who had chosen to build something better than what they had inherited. The road ahead would not be easy. Luna would face her own challenges, her own struggles to find her place in a world that was still learning to accept change, but she would face them with parents who loved her, with a kingdom that was learning to value all its wolves, and with the knowledge that she came from 2 bloodlines that had survived impossible odds through courage and love. And perhaps that was all anyone could really give to the next generation: the tools to keep fighting, the wisdom to know what was worth fighting for, and the love to make it all worthwhile. If you enjoyed this story of the invisible servant who became a queen, of the cold king who learned to lead with compassion, of ancient power revealed under moonlight and love that transformed a kingdom, please like this video and let me know in the comments what you thought about Alara and Chaol's journey. Should I create more stories about silver wolves and their unique powers? Or would you like to see different supernatural bloodlines explored? And do not forget to subscribe for more werewolf romance stories filled with magic, mystery, and mates who defy destiny. Until next time, may the moon light your path and may you find the courage to step out of the shadows and claim your power.